have to start thinking on a broader scale also of what is to come. And this worries me quite a lot, primarily for a simple reason, which is the most important tool that has worked so far to keep this disease at a check has been social distancing. And so if any of you have either visited or lived in places with high density, you know and realize that this idea that you could shut yourself down from interactions from people just from a physical space perspective does not work. So one of the strongest tools that we have access to might not actually work globally. This is a serious concern to be thinking about as we're starting to think what will unfold in the next 6 months to a year. This is a picture taken from Kenya after the lockdown was imposed, and these are essential markets. All goods are sold in, and many of the food markets suffer from a primary challenge that social distancing might not be accessible. The sets of government interventions that have been put in places sometimes actually lead to challenging situations. This is another picture from Bangladesh looking at a ration line where people are waiting to get food. You know, as often many people say, to never miss a great crisis. Could we really use this crisis as a way to rethink some of the challenges and some of the underbelly of the mistakes that we have made in the past and how we deploy healthcare? You know, of course, the proactive action of prevention and actually technologies looking at ecological measurements have been highlighted as a huge missing link in our capacity to detect these pandemics. Another area that I am quite interested in, and I'm curious how people would think about it, is to new ways of thinking about technology transfer. And how do you do that in an equitable access where we're talking about medical supplies that are literally essential, but are guarded secrets because of patents and because of the way the economies actually work. One of the other things this has highlighted about is the value of distributed manufacturing to really be able to bring capacity to many of the places that we are starting to engage and not just the supplies as aid. And none of us alone can solve these sets of challenges, but we can all be the little bricks and pieces. That's a tough one. I think I have to honestly say it all begins with empathy and starting to understand the needs, the reality that you have to study fundamental science as much as applied science. This might sound really applied right now, but if we had invested more on surveillance of bats, not just for human diseases, but just for understanding how ecology works, we might not have been here. So I don't want to, beyond the seminar, any of the young people that are on this call, I don't want you to take a lesson that, these projects might sound very applied, but really the fundamental and the basic biology and the curiosity to explore is as important, because for certain sets of circumstances, we are here because of a lack of imagination. We just did not have the sets of technology to track these sets of systems, or we do not as yet understand the ecology of zoonotic transmissions, for example. So the path should be yours. You should choose what you're passionate about and then do lots of projects. I think, that's the one thing you could do is find classes that are goal-oriented and project-oriented so you can test your ideas quickly. I would say, I think for much of the work that our lab has done currently, there are certain flashes of an idea, but it's also a very iterative process. It might not sound like that at the end of the day, but for us, it's really been about pushing to make sure that each one of the solutions are clinically validated and we have enough data. So, of course, we all focus on the inspiration part, the aha moment, but the big lesson here in these sets of projects is how much hard work it is to go from an idea to an FDA approval in, kind of 1 month's time, for example. So I would emphasize that, yes, ideas are important and interesting, and you have to rule out bad ones. So the rule of thumb is just have lots of ideas. But the harder part in this crisis situation is how do we make sure that we can bring these sets of solutions from academic settings to implementation, which is one of our hardest challenges. And I think that's something that requires a broad-minded approach. And I think if you read the news every day, the problems to solve. And if you're working on the right problem to solve, eventually something will give.